Let's look at the new chapter, Understanding Social Institutions. So, what is a social institution? Well, it is something that operates according to the rules established or acknowledged by law or custom. Thus, it is an established and structural pattern of behavior or relationship that is accepted as a fundamental part of a culture. So let's first brush up on our past knowledge. We have individuals who are members of a society, and every individual occupies a place or a location in the society, and this individual carries out his or her role as per the status. Now, these individuals are regulated by macro institutions like the state and the micro institutions like the family that provide them with opportunities as well as control, constrain, and punish or reward them. Note that there are different forms of understanding of social institutions as well. So, we have the functionalist view of social institutions as satisfying social needs. We therefore have formal social institutions like law and education, and informal social institutions like family and religion doing just that with their complex set of social norms and role relationship. The conflict view of society holds social institutions like family, religion, legal or political institutions, etc., as operating in the interests of the dominant section of the society, be it class, caste, tribe, or gender. This dominant section propagates its ideology and also dominates the political and economic institutions of the society. Thus, this is very different from the idea that there are general needs of a society. So, we have viewed both the conflict and functionalist perspective of social institutions. Now, let's proceed to get a better understanding of the institutions one by one. We begin with the institution of family, marriage, and kinship, which, as a matter of fact, are most important in all societies and viewed as kind of universal and unchanging. Note that their characters vary across different societies. So, let's begin with the institution of family. Basically, the best way to define a family is as a socially organized group which is usually either joined by blood, that is consanguineal relationship, or by marriage, that is a filial relationship, or adoption, constituting a single household, and these members within the household interacting with each other. Institution of family is linked to the economic, political, cultural, and educational spheres. Let's begin with the functionalist perspective, which views the institution of family as contributing to the society's basic need and perpetuating social order. According to this perspective, modern industrial societies function optimally if work is divided between the genders. That is, there is a specialization of roles whereby women are taking care of the home and men earn a living for the family. That is, as per Giddens, the husband adopts the instrumental role as a breadwinner and the wife assumes the effective emotional role in the domestic setup. Indian studies show that families need not become nuclear in a modern industrial society. Looking at history and going over empirical studies across cultures indicates that this gender based division of work is baseless and gender unjust. For example, the garment export industries of today have more women workers as a part of their labor force. Also, there are many societies, for example, the Kolams, a tribal community in southeast Maharashtra and northern Andhra Pradesh, where the women are the sole providers for their families and therefore they are seen as the head of the household. So you can see that men are not necessarily the head of the household. Now, let us understand the various family types prevalent in India. We begin with the nuclear family and the joint family. A nuclear family is a family having a pair of adults and their socially recognized children. And this type of family has always existed, particularly among deprived caste and classes. Joint families are multi generational families, that is, parents, their children, and the children's spouses and offsprings in the household. In your book, a study by A.M. Shah is mentioned, and his study indicates that in post independent India, joint families have been on the rise. This is a contradiction of the common sense impression that the joint family system is on the decline and the nuclear family system is on the rise as India is shaping into a modern industrial society. Shah's findings indicate the increasing life expectancy of both men and women to be the underlying reason for an increase in the number of joint families. So, this study alerts us to the need for careful comparative and empirical studies and cautions us against blindly believing common sense impression. Now, let us look at the diverse family forms found in different societies and define them. First, let's look at families based on their rule of residence, that is, matrilocal and patrilocal. So, some societies are matrilocal in their marriage and family customs, while others are patrilocal. So, we have the newly married couple staying with the women's parents in case of matrilocal and vice versa in the case of patrilocal. The second categorization is patriarchal and matriarchal family structure based on who exercises authority and dominance. In patriarchal, we have the man taking the important decisions and thereby exerting power and authority, while in matriarchal, the woman plays a major role. The third categorization is patrilineal and matrilineal society, whereby the family's inheritance is traced through the father's side in case of patrilineal and mother's side in case of matrilineal. Note, while matrilineal societies exist, matriarchal societies are virtually non existent. Now, the question is, are families static? No, families change and they're linked to other social spheres. An example is the unintended consequences of German unification of the 1990s, which resulted in a rapid decline in marriage as the protection and welfare schemes of post unification Germany were discontinued by the new German state. People began to feel economically insecure, and this insecurity manifested by the people unwilling to get married. So, family and kinship are affected by macroeconomic processes. But note, the direction and change will vary from society to society, and also change will not mean complete erosion of the previous norms and structure, but actually a coexistence of change with continuity. Now, the next question is, how gendered is the family? Well, we find through statistics like the declining child sex ratio and the increasing infant mortality rate as indicating that our society still differentiates between male and female child. People prefer to have a male child as they believe that the male child carries the family name and will provide support to the parents in their old age. Also, certain rituals have a predominant male role in them, and hence the biasness towards the male offsprings. So, despite the fact that biologically the female baby has a better chance of survival than a male baby, the infant mortality rate among the female children is higher in comparison to the male child. These statistics provide us information about the society's attitude towards the female child. Now, let us look at the institution of marriage. Marriage is defined as a socially acknowledged and approved sexual union between two adults. So, when two people marry, they become kin to each other. Marriage has a large variety of forms. That is, number one, on the basis of the number of partners, we have monogamy, whereby there is one spouse at a time, and polygamy, meaning that there are many spouses at a time. On the basis of rules governing who can marry whom, we have arranged marriage or we have choice marriage, and we have exogamy and endogamy. We shall be discussing all these in detail. First, let's look at monogamy. Now, monogamy is more prevalent worldwide. In many societies, individuals are permitted to marry again, that is, after divorce or death of a spouse. This kind of monogamous marriage is termed as serial monogamy. Note that remarriage has been the norm for men, but not for upper caste Hindu widows. This issue was a part of the 19th century reform movements, and through various campaigns for widow remarriage, this issue was addressed. This is significant as a study by Chen in 2000 showed that nearly 10% of all women and 55% of women over 50 years are widows in India. In polygamy, we have polygyny, where there is one husband having two or more wives, while polyandry is one wife having two or more husbands. Generally, polygyny is prevalent in many societies as opposed to polyandry. Polyandry is found in societies that have harsh economic conditions where it is difficult for a single male to support a wife and children. These societies are characterized by limited population and impoverished people. Now, let's look at the second type, that is, on the basis of rules governing who can marry who. We have arranged marriage, where the mate selection is by parents or relatives, and the second type is the personal choice marriage, where individuals choose whom to marry on their own. Another rule governing marriages is based on eligibility of mates, that is, whether of the same clan, caste, ethnic, racial, or religious groupings, or a different one. So we have endogamy, where marriage is within that culturally defined group of which that individual is a member. And exogamy is marriage outside the culturally defined group of which that individual is a member. In parts of North India, village exogamy and caste endogamy is the norm. The logic behind village exogamy is that it ensured smooth transition and adjustment of the bride into the affinal home without the interference of her kinsmen. So let's define affinal, which means kin who are related by marriage, as opposed to consanguinal kin, which means those kins who are related through blood. This brings us to the definition of the two terms. Number one, that is the family of birth or the family of orientation. And number two, the family of procreation. In the first, we look at from the perspective of blood relatives, and in the second, relatives of the partner by virtue of marriage. So, our social institution of family, marriage, and kinship is complete, and now we will move on to the next institution, that is work and economic life. Our understanding of work is associated with paid employment, but there is work which is part of the informal economy where cash and kind are exchanged for work. Informal economy refers to transactions outside the domain of regular employment, that is, workers and enterprises that do not come under the regulation of the government, as opposed to the formal sector, which comprises of businesses and activities that are under the supervision of the government. Here, the formal sector worker has access to social security and benefits which are not there for the informal sector worker. So, work is defined as paid or unpaid work which involves carrying out of tasks and requiring the expenditure of mental and physical effort, which has as its objective of production of goods and services that cater to the human needs. So societies have seen an evolution of work from manual field work and livestock rearing in the pre-modern times to using machines in farming in the modern period and the expansion of the service sector. So let's look at the characteristics of the economic system of modern societies. Four broad ones, so as to speak, are there. First is the existence of a highly complex division of labor, where work is divided into various occupations in which people specialize. In traditional societies, craft skills were learned through a lengthy period of apprenticeship, and the worker carried out all aspects of the production process from beginning to end. Second is the shift in the location of work. Before industrialization, work was at home and involved family members. With technological advancement and the use of inanimate power source like coal and electricity, there came about a separation of work from home. Also, industrial development marked the ownership of factories by capitalist entrepreneurs. Third is the specialized training for the specialized task to be handled by the worker at a factory. Workers secured wages for their work, managers supervised the work. All this was to enhance worker productivity and discipline. Finally, the modern economy is characterized by enormous economic interdependence for goods and services to sustain our lives. With few exceptions, the vast majority of people in modern society do not produce the food that they eat or the material goods they consume or the services they require. So we have the industrial processes being broken down into simple operation that could precisely be timed, organized, and monitored. The construction of the moving assembly line resulted in increasing efficiency of the worker. Continuous monitoring of workers through surveillance system and the use of expensive equipment has hugely transformed work in the modern times. Gradually, in the modern times, there has been a shift to flexible production and decentralization of work. What is flexible production? Well, it means to be easily able to alter production quantity or variety without making major changes in the infrastructure or incurring significant costs. What is the meaning of decentralization? Well, decentralization of work is when the top management delegates decision-making responsibilities and daily operation to middle and lower subordinates, and therefore the top management is able to focus on taking major decisions. This change has been ushered in the period of globalization, as there is a growing competition between firms of different countries and the ability to be able to organize production as per the changing market conditions, and this is essential for the firms in order to survive. So globalization has brought in a new organization of production and a body of customers outside the country, which has altered the economics and politics of production. So, with this, we leave the work and economic institution and move on to the political institutions. So, political institutions are concerned with the distribution of power in the society through power and authority. Power is always held in relation to others. There is some people wield power and others do not. And this is viewed as the ability of the individual and groups to carry out their will even when opposed by others. The question arises is, how is this power applied to achieve its aim? Well, it is exercised through authority, which is a form of legitimate power and makes people comply as they view it as right and just. It is institutionalized because it is based on legitimacy. Let's look at the subtopic stateless societies. Now, modern state has a fixed structure and there are formal procedures in order to maintain order. So the question arises is, before the concept of modern state, how was social order maintained in stateless societies? Well, it was through the use of informal mechanisms like cross-cutting alliances based on kinship, marriage, and residence, and rites and ceremonies that involve the participation of friends and foes, all help to maintain social order. So these were the informal mechanisms and they were very effective. Now let's look at the concept of the state, which has a political apparatus of institutions like a parliament or a congress and civil service officials or bureaucrats ruling over a given territory. Government authority is exercised through the use of a legal system and military force. The functionalist perspective sees the state as representing the interests of all sections of the society, while the conflict perspective views the state as representing the dominant sections of the society. Modern state is defined broadly by two things. Number one, sovereignty. Number two, citizenship. What is sovereignty? Well, it is the undisputed political rule of a state over a given territory. And citizenship, which is a legal status between a citizen and a state, and it entails certain political rights and also duties. So, having citizenship entails being given certain civil, political, and social rights. By civil rights, the individual freedom to live in an area of their choice is granted. Then there is freedom of speech and the freedom to practice one's religion. Also, the right to own property and the right to equal justice before the law are all included in the civil rights. Now we look at political rights, which means the right to participate in elections and the right to stand for public office. Note, in the early years, women and men without property were excluded from this right. Now, this is not so, and everyone above 18 in India has a right to vote. The last right that we look at is social rights, and this means to enjoy a certain minimum standard of economic welfare and security, which includes health benefits, unemployment allowance, minimum level of wages. The broadening of the social rights led to the establishment of the welfare state in Western societies since World War II. This was non existent in most developing countries. Now, in developed countries, these social rights are viewed as liabilities on the state and a hindrance to economic growth, and this is noteworthy. Another feature of the state is the concept of nationalism. What is nationalism? Well, it is defined as a set of symbols and beliefs providing the sense of being part of a single political community. Note, the contemporary world is marked both by a rapid expansion of the global market as well as intense nationalist feelings and conflicts. Sociology seeks to understand the distribution of power between collectivities, whether it be political parties or caste, class, and communities. From how political institutions and non-political institutions like school, religion, etc. equate with power, to the micro-study of village factions and the macro study of international movements like environment and women's movement, how all of them use and wield power is what sociology seeks to understand. Now we move on to the next institution, that is religion. So, religion describes the beliefs, the values, and the practices related to the sacred or the spiritual concerns. The sociological study of religion is very different from a religious or theological study of religion. How, you might ask? Well, number one, sociology conducts empirical studies of how religions actually function in a society and its relationships to other institutions. Secondly, sociology uses a comparative method. Third, sociology investigates religious beliefs, practices, and institutions in relation to other aspects of society and culture. Note, all societies have religion, but religious beliefs and practices vary from culture to culture. So let's move on to the characteristics of religion. And what are they? Well, number one, religion is characterized by a set of symbols invoking feelings of reverence or awe. Number two, rituals or ceremonies. Number three, a community of believers. The rituals are very diverse and may include praying, chanting, singing, eating or not eating certain kinds of food, or even fasting. These are oriented towards religious symbols, which are usually seen as quite distinct from the habits and procedures of ordinary life. For example, lighting a diya or a candle during praying as part of a ritual or ceremony is different in its significance to simply lighting for the purpose of illuminating the room. Religious rituals can be carried out individually or by a collectivity, that is, a community of believers, as part of ceremonials. Regular ceremonials normally occur in special places like temples, shrines, churches, mosques, etc. Religion is about sacred realm, and people show respect for sacred places or situations by following certain procedures, like, say, covering one's head or not covering one's head, by taking off shoes, or by dressing in a way that is fit or appropriate to that place. We'll be looking at two sociologists in particular, that is Durkheim and Weber, and their approach to religion. Durkheim is one of the sociologists who sought to understand this sacred realm, which every society distinguishes from the profane. In most cases, the sacred includes an element of the supernatural, in the sense that the sacred quality of an object, like, say, a tree, is because of the belief that there is some supernatural force behind it. Now, note that Buddhism and Confucianism didn't have a concept of the supernatural, but there is reverence offered to things and persons that these religions consider sacred. Note that religion has a very close relationship to power and politics. Religious movements are instrumental in bringing about social change. Religion, therefore, is not confined to private belief but also has a public character. Classical sociologists believed that as societies modernized, religion would become less influential over various spheres of life. That is, there would be secularism. Let's look at Max Weber's study of religion and relationship to social and economic behavior. Weber sought to prove that religion has an influence on economic development. He argues that Calvinism, which was a branch of Protestant Christianity, exerted an important influence on the emergence and growth of capitalism as a mode of economic organization. The Calvinists believed that the world was God's creation and God would be pleased through their work. Their going to heaven and hell was predestined, but they could look for clues or by reading the signs of God's will in their work acts or occupations. So, a person who is consistent and successful in his work meant that God was pleased with that person, and the only way to retain God's continuous benevolence was to continually invest the money in the work and not spend it on personal luxuries. People worked for the glory of God, and investing money was like a holy creed. Thus, for the Calvinists, work was worship. And if you look at it, this is capitalism and investment so as to produce more goods and more capital, which leads to economic development. Now, let's move on to the next social institution, that is education. So, education is a social institution through which society's younger generation are taught basic academic knowledge, learning skills, and cultural norms. Note, education is a lifelong process involving both formal and informal institutions of learning. From the sociological point of view, education is a process of transmission or communication of group heritage that is common to all societies. Modern complex societies rest on abstract universalistic values. Schools are designed to promote uniformity, standardize aspirations, and universalize values through, say, a standardized curriculum, through uniform dress for school students, etc. Now, simple societies depended on particularistic values that were based on family, kin, tribes, caste, and religion. So, you can see the different attitude towards education in simple and modern societies. Here, we mention Durkheim, who said that no society can survive without a common base, a certain number of ideas, sentiments, and practices which education must inculcate in all children indiscriminately to whatever social category they belong. Now let's look at both the functional and conflict perspective on education. For the functionalist, education has a social need and promotes social norms. The educational system is, number one, an important mechanism for the selection and allocation of individuals in their future role in the society. Secondly, it is valued for proving one's ability and setting a status as per the individual's ability. Now, the conflict perspective sees society as unequally differentiated, with education as the main stratifying agent. And number two, the inequality of the educational opportunities is also a product of social stratification. In other words, because of the access to different kinds of schools, we acquire different kinds of privileges and different kinds of opportunities, and this intensifies the existing divide between the elite and the masses. Gender and caste are also affected by the access to education, and hence this affects their access to occupation. Now, with this, we conclude the chapter.